this topic is another pretty big principle for us. It is stepping from stone to stone is kind of how we phrase it, but essentially it means going with the flow and being adaptable and changing to circumstance and changing to the relationship that's created with the combatant and in life. And so we have to sort of pick through that as we go, and we have to adapt, and so those are things that are true. It's been my experience that most of what is true as like a life principle is also true as a combative principle. And Pencak Silat Pertempuran, we have a lot of ways of sort of expressing that that adaptability component, and building it in people is one of our primary functions as teachers and gurus in Silat. And the way we do that, we have a couple, like I said, we have actually quite a few different methods, because we always point back to the same kinds of principles. The structure of the system is set up to always kind of go back to those primary things, and this piece is no different. So one of the ways we do that in PSP is acknowledging first off that being adaptable is critical, and the way that we do that, we'll do these things through different statements, but a lot of times we not only just say it, we practice fighting. And when you practice fighting, you're going to discover that shit doesn't go the way you think it should go. And the more that you fight, the less that you will see things come out exactly as you plan. So, and I should say, the more that you truly test yourself and your skills, you can only orchestrate so much in combat. Now, there are things you can do to eliminate, maybe not eliminate, but reduce the chaos of combat. And we say this all the time, that combat is chaos. And, one thing that you can do to help reduce that chaos is expose yourself to different types of training, different situations, using the same materials. So this is the thing that PSP, I think, does very well at. Many systems that I've studied have different answers for different situations and different scenarios. And even practitioners, a lot of times what they'll do is, and I did it early on as a martial artist, I'm moving along in the system, finding answers, getting solutions, and then run into some problems and look elsewhere for solutions for those. And that's one way to handle it. In my experience, that leads you down a path of collecting a lot of material but not mastering very much of it. And PSP, to me, is really my own response to that problem and that process. I saw that in myself, and I see that in others now that I didn't recognize it when I was doing it, of course, but I did eventually come to terms with the fact that there was a point at which I was studying Kun Tao, Hok Kun from the Philippines, very related to Gocho, and I was studying Kali Eskrima Arnis, and I say all three of those because at one point I was actually literally studying three different arts of stick and knife, but I continued to maintain those. I'd also started taking on Garrote Lorenza, and I was playing around with that, and at the same time doing Wing Chun and some Silat. At the time it was more the JKD Mande Muda type Silat, but so I was doing all that stuff, and it took probably, I don't know, 10 years of chasing my tail with all those things, trying to find answers for all the issues that arose in combat before I realized that the answer wasn't in more, the answer was in less. And so, I don't know, it was around the year 2000, I think, maybe even 99, somewhere in there, that I started just not studying all those things. I stopped training them, and I stopped pursuing things. In fact, I kind of forcefully told myself, you know what, you're not going to do that anymore. And I isolated myself to just PSP. And at the time, PSP was even still bigger than it is today, which should tell you something about the progression of PSP. The expressions of PSP were a reduction. It was a massive reduction for me. There are things that I like to do in fighting that I don't teach because systematically they don't fit with PSP. I still personally perform them, but they don't fit structurally with PSP, so I don't include them in the training materials. Now, the reason that is all related to Lankadari Batu ke Batu, which is stepping from stone to stone, is because what I found was when I started reducing all of that material and condensing it down to core things, that suddenly I was able to be more adaptable, and in fact it encouraged me becoming more adaptable. What ended up happening was that I found that I could find solutions for most everything that I wanted to find a solution for when I spent the time to deeply pursue it, contemplate it, and then train the hell out of it. And it didn't always happen instantly. You know, there are things that I have in the system that took me a couple of years to recognize ultimately that I could use them for, you know, a different thing. And that adaptability, that being able to modify on the fly, that pursuit of understanding chaos is not so natural as it would seem, of course, because we generally want to have things in order, and we generally want to have things given to us as solutions as opposed to struggling through them. And it has been my experience that struggle is really one of the more beneficial components of Pencak Silat Pertempuran's study. And struggling through things is really good for teaching you adversity and adaptability. And you know, we say Lankadari Batu ke Batu, which is stepping from stone to stone, and it's a response to the chaos of combat. But it is not strictly about combat, as I mentioned earlier. And it's not strictly about stepping from solution to solution, right? So stepping from stone to stone is a way to get across the river, right? So if there's a river and you want to get to the other side, you know, one way to do that is to make a bridge. Another way to do that is to step from stone to stone, right? And the reason we use that particular phrasing is because it's a way to be in the moment, be in the present, and not try to make something, make a man-made thing try to fit a natural occurrence. So making a bridge, for example, will work really well as long as you have the materials and the time to put that into place, right? But when you don't, you have to be able to still get across the river. And so this component of stepping from stone to stone is the idea of being able to adapt relationally to what's actually happening. So we tend to, in PSP, for example, the system structure is, you know, use one piece at a time. And I address that in the timing ratio. And again, this is why this is a system, not just a style, not just a rehash of the same old shit, is that the single component idea, the smaller piece, the fundamental pieces, which everybody agrees you have to be good at, and yet everybody's in a hurry to leave for the more advanced things. But if you can focus long enough to keep those fundamentals constantly being renewed by development, you'll find that you don't really need to have the advanced stuff, because the advanced stuff shows up in all of your fundamentals, right? It's the chaining of fundamentals, and sometimes it's not even the chaining. Sometimes it's literally the fundamentals, and you adapt those fundamentals to an advanced application. And because we do that, PSP allows you to become eventually to have the mindset of adaptability rather than acceptance, and rather than a defeatist attitude which says, oh, I don't have a solution for that. What you're really developing in PSP is the ability to say, maybe I don't know the solution right now, but I'm going to keep working at it and I'll figure it out. And it's here. I know it's here. So that's what we're trying to do with PSP. There's a lot of ways, to get there. This is an expression, and I don't think most systems have that. They offer glimpses of it, but I don't know that it's as wired into the system as it is for PSP. Pencak Silat Pertempuran, the goal is to be able to fight multiple opponents, right? A lot of our training is really only about fighting an individual. And that confuses people, because Pertempuran means, to combat with many, to battle, to fight with many. It implies no rules. It implies chaos, right? It doesn't have to explicitly rather say that. But what's true about that is, if you really study multiple opponent fighting, the best way to fight multiple opponents is one at a time. And so our goal is to, as quickly as possible, again, that timing ratio, step from stone to stone, right? So if there are 8 people, which thank God I've never had to deal with, but I have had to deal with 2 or 3, and the best way to deal with 2 or 3 people is one at a time. So you deal with this person, and then you deal with the next person, and you deal with the next person. As much as possible, that means figuring out your mobility, figuring out how to move. We don't spend any time really in stance training in PSP. We spend most of our time learning how to move efficiently. Again, that's why this is a system and not just my personal style or some other bullshit like that. This is really a thoughtful, organized, put together process, and it will continue to grow and manifest as it needs to, right? Because the purpose again is adaptability. Lanka, Dari, Batu ke Batu, and Batuan ke Batuan if you want to be specific, very classic. But so PSP is really just the premise is learning how to be fully adaptable in every situation by not putting, not investing in a future time, but being present in the relationship right now. And that's functional living, right? That's how we should live every day. Right now, my family's going through a lot of tough crap. We're dealing with a lot, and I'm not going to get into what they are, but it's stuff that's life-changing. And the only way that we can really do that is one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. There are literally days, where you just feel like, man, this is just unrealistic. But you just have to, one foot in front of another, one stone to the next, and keep going through it. And that's the same with combat, right? You don't know what's coming. You don't know how you're going to respond. I think it was Mike Tyson who said something like this. I'm not going to say it correctly, but everybody has a plan until they get hit. It's like that. I have been hit, and suddenly all your training goes out the window. In particular, when you don't, when you have too much material. I literally, in PSP, we literally try as realistically as possible to reduce. And the reason is because then we can adapt. The more adaptable you are with the fewer things, the more you're going to be able to respond using your actual training, and that is hugely important in life, in combat, in your jobs, in your careers, whatever. Find what your tools are. Use your tools till you just don't think you can use them anymore, and then just keep trying, because you will find that they really are much more useful than you imagined when you have the right mindset about them, when you change the perspective. Sometimes you have to turn, the full cup has to be turned over and looked at like, oh, it's not a cup anymore, it's a container. So there are just things you learn by reducing and by adapting, and the more you adapt, the more easily you adapt in the future, and the more that you can really respond appropriately, using less to do so. And it's somewhat freeing to do that, rather than needing more and more and more. I find myself needing less and less and less, and I need more depth in that, and that is hugely important in my life right now. So anyway, if you have any more questions or anything, info@combat-silat.net. And this is Guru Stark again with Pencak Silat Pertempuran. And if you have any questions at all, write me. info@combat-silat.net. combat-silat.net. And I will do my best to answer them. I'm not going to do probably individual questions, but I'm coalescing these into vlogs, because I find most questions aren't that different from one another. So anyway, thanks. Take care.